So, Berto, this is chapter 2 in our deep dive on the psychology of Jodi Arias.
Wow.
And I thought we would start off this chapter by talking about why are cases like these cases, like the Jodi Arias case and the trial, why are they so fascinating to us as a culture? Why are they highlighted in the media? And the first thing I want to go into is even supporting that hypothesis that it is unusual that it is highlighted. You know, there are things about this case, people say, well, it's a murder. It's fascinating. But let me give you some stats as to differentiate as to why would this kind of case. So if we look at statistics, these are 2020 stats, by the way, percentage of murders that are committed by men, people identify as men, what percentage in the United States of murders are committed by men?
70%.
87.
87. Wow.
Now, it's still 13%, either people identify as
That's
women
very high.
or other. But, a lot of murders, vast majority committed by percentage of intimate partner murders committed by men.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'll go 80%.
Very good. 78%.
Okay.
So there's a higher rate of
Overall.
of women killing men, but
in their
overall it's
relationship.
still a vast majority of men who are the committers of murder of a partner. Percentage of murder victims who were black. So victims
who were black.
who were black.
Ooh. From overall murders?
Well, so let's start off with what is the percentage of Americans who identify as black?
Oh, I see. 20%?
12%.
12%. Okay.
So what percentage? So if everything was equal, it'd be 12% of murder victims were black. But what do you think the real percentage is?
Well, percent of murder victims that are black is like 50%.
Good, 56. So much more likely.
Yeah.
Percentage of murder victims who are black, 56%.
56%.
Even though black people amount to 12% of the American population. Now, we could, of course, talk about all the historical and systemic racism that's involved in that, and police brutality, and poverty, and oppression, and all that stuff, of course. But those are the facts, that the vast majority of murders are committed by men, and the vast majority of victims of murder are probably black men, or at least black people.
Yeah.
And it seems, though, that white women are way overrepresented in the media when it comes to these kinds of stories. Not only if they're the perpetrator, but also if they're the victim. There's been a lot of talk more recently in the media, but in my field, in my discipline, we've been yammering about this for decades, that if a black woman is raped and killed across town, the media just doesn't even mention it. But if a white woman is abducted, then it's
international news.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. That woman who, tragically, Gabby Petito, a couple years ago.
Like, all of these are tragedies. All of them.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah.
And of course, they deserve to be told and attempted to find the perpetrator or find her, because she was missing for a while. But at the same time, there's so many other people, and more likelihood of other sorts of people that from other groups that are not being reported on. All right, there are also a lot of movie depictions that are way overrepresentative of women perpetrators of intimate partner murder or violence or control, this kind of thing.
Yes, that's true.
Can you think of any movies off the top of your head?
Gone Girl. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, it's another Fatal Attraction.
Fatal Attraction, yeah.
Play Misty for Me. Single White Female.
Yeah.
The Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
Oh, there's a lot. Isn't that with Rebecca De Mornay?
Yep. Yeah. The Crush with Alicia Silverstone.
Right.
All About Steve, 2009, with Bradley Cooper, Sandra Bullock.
I don't think I saw that.
The Boy Next Door, 2015, Jennifer Lopez, Ryan Guzman, and many others.
Yeah.
We have a fascinating... Now, you say, well, there's a lot of movies about men who are obsessed with women or who stalk women. Well, I could only think of a few. For example, Phantom of the Opera, which was made into a movie. Fear with Marky Mark and Reese Witherspoon. It's kind of a classic.
But you could also say that any of the like Psycho and American Psycho, and like there's a lot of guy psycho movies where the guy is the bad guy. Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees.
Yeah,
you know.
but maybe not specifically focusing on one individual, like
Right.
oh
yeah. It's more like, that's true. Those
they're
are
just
serial
generally psycho, right?
Yeah.
But with Phantom of the Opera and Fear,
Yeah.
and with The Crush and Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Fatal Attraction, this is someone that is not just a psychopathic, sadistic killer. It's someone who is obsessed and stalking and maybe even trying to kill this
Right.
one romantic interest. You, the TV show on Netflix. But, and I'm sure there are a few other examples, but in my anecdotal analysis, we as a society are much more likely to be interested and tell stories when women are abusing their men, their intimate partners that are men, and trying to kill them. So if aliens watched our movies, they would think that women are the perpetrators of that crime.
And I think probably because in general, we want movies and fiction that is not day-to-day stuff.
Okay, so that's one of the theories. So let's list them out.
Like, that's why we have Jaws,
Okay. So that's one of the theories, that it's novel, right?
Yeah.
It's unusual. This case where you have a woman, the argument, everyone understands that most of the time when an intimate partner is stalking and killing their former partner, it's a man killing a wife. But that's mundane. It's a given. But when a woman does it, that's newsworthy. Okay, so we could throw that out there. It's hard to know exactly what motivates the public, but we could throw that. What are some other hypotheses?
Well, there's the fact that it's a woman, but also the kind of woman, because like this appears to be a I hate to say it, but it's someone that you would not expect to do it from our preconceived notions of society, because you would imagine they live in a better part of town, they are lighter skinned, they seem to, whether they do or not, they seem to have more means at their disposal, blah blah blah. And so we're like, whoa, what? We thought all criminals looked like this, and we're so there's the sex, also the race, also the socioeconomic status, also probably the demeanor in this case. It's not like, and I'll kill them all and I'll do it again. I'm like psycho, right? It's like, I don't know, officer.
Okay.
So a lot of those factors.
That's another idea.
There's also a timing issue, which is, I think you said that there were 2 that year. There's probably a lot every year, but I think maybe the media picked up on both because they were close to each other.
Oh, so one became a media sensation, and then the other one was like,
the media.
Hey, this is the new
one.
This is a new Casey Anthony.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that.
There's also the egregiousness of the situation. Because, again, there's probably a lot of cases. In fact, there are a lot of cases where a woman did kill her partner, maybe even stalked and killed the partner. But then when you start stacking all the additional circumstances, like the cross state lines, the over-the-top nature of the killing itself, the over-the-top nature of the line, like all those kinds of things make it also stand out. If the story was like, it was a woman, she killed her husband, and then you see the interview, it's like, yeah, I did it. It was horrible. Yeah, like, okay, well, fine. But it's not. There's layers and layers and layers, and every single aspect of it is over the top. Mm-hmm. So
given that it could arguably be said that this is the first live streamed on the internet, if you say Casey Anthony was the first social media based crime, meaning that all the social media pictures that were mined as a way of trying to not only convict her and demonstrate that she was guilty, but also to throw at the press so that everyone could talk. You could say that O.J. Simpson was the first live television, trial of the century, and then the Jodi Arias trial was the very first YouTubed, live streamed.
I mean, it's like the OJ example is like, how often do you have a world famous star in a chase on live TV after brutally, allegedly murdering, blah, blah.
It's like if it happened 10 years earlier, we would have read in the newspaper the next day that O.J. Simpson was on the road, and they'd summarize it, but you wouldn't really have felt it the way that you felt it when we were watching that live. And given the fact that there are so many details to pour over and talk about online and keep you watching.
That said, Lizzie Borden, you know that name, right? She was a famous female killer back in, I don't know, late 1800s, early 1900s. And how many killers must there have been all those years at all times? Yet I know the name Lizzie Borden.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I think maybe for a long time, things like this stood out.
Well, why would that be? I mean, at the same time, in the late 1800s, presumably...
For the similar reasons, because, you know, it's like, it's the same thing, you know. Imagine, you know, we rewind the clock 600 years, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe it. There was a raid in the town next door. It's like, yeah, I know, it sucks, but remember, there's raids like every few months around here. Okay. But the other one's like, dude, you're not going to believe it. Like, you know, Melinda, she just like brutally murdered her family. Like, that stands out.
Yeah.
So now we're going to tell a story about that.
Yeah. So I'm saying that absolutely novelty could be a factor. The other things I could think of is that she fits a story trope or a cultural trope, if you will, a cliche of the ultimate ex-girlfriend nightmare. Right. You remember this video around 10 years ago, I remember, was floating around where it became one of those first viral videos that I remember anyway. And this guy was in front of at least I think this is how it went down. He was in front of a whiteboard, and he's just a regular guy or something. And he's talking about how there's this matrix or a graph that you can depict women on two axes. So these are all heterosexual women that he's talking about, and he's like,
oh, this sounds familiar.
Yeah, the axes are between good looks, how good looking she is. Well, anyway, I can't remember exactly how.
Yeah, but I remember the.
But they were saying that
about.
the more good looking a woman gets, the crazier she has to be, and so there's a quadrant on the axes graph area that you can't have a woman that is both extremely hot, but is not crazy. Point is that...
It's so disgusting.
Yeah, it's disgusting and sexist, but it is absolutely an idea that's floated around by misogynists and society. You know, we could speculate as to why, but it's definitely not supported by the science.
Well, but there is one aspect that I think is this concept of, hey, this person is like really wild in bed, or, you know, just very open, liberally sex whatever, and they're also and then there's a whole bunch of other issues with them. Well, it is possible that people with more trauma, more abuse, more things happen to also have more extreme behaviors in general, which can include sexual behaviors. So people over time might generalize and say, yeah, that's a thing.
Right. So this is a trope, and I think it was particularly prevalent in really mainstream male culture 10 years ago, and this case slotted exactly into that, right?
Sure.
I mean, can you see how people would look at her that way?
Absolutely. They'd be like, well, there you go. That proves the theory.
Yeah, because we haven't gone into details, and we won't a lot, but there are a lot of graphic sexual details about this case.
Right, and the recordings of them talking together, her own descriptions about their relationship on the stand.
Yeah. I mean, it was described in detail, so many data points.
And they had the pictures before the murder, like everything is just like on display.
Yeah, I mean, they literally had sex and took pictures of each other minutes before she was brutally murdering him. Yeah. So that's one hypothesis I would throw out there as to why our society is so fascinated by this case and others like it. Another is that it just involves sex. I mean, let's be honest. Anything that involves sex is something that society is going to talk about.
Right.
And also, there's this notion of the sexy woman, right, who commits a crime, Foxy Noxy in Italy, that kind of thing. And also the fact that he's a religious man trying to be pure, and this attractive, sexy temptress succubus comes in and you know, tempts him to the other side. Another factor that could be present is the brutality of the murder. Yeah. There are, you know, like we've been saying, probably daily murders like this, or at least weekly, or I don't know what the rate would be, but it's, you know, it's frequent. But often it's a gunshot to the head or just a couple stabs. But the brutality and the fact that we have like at least one picture of it happening at the time, you know, it's a picture gets taken accidentally, seemingly, by her while she's murdering him. And then also they released the pictures of his body in the shower when they found him a week later.
It's another one of those, like, how does that serve the public good? Like, imagine.
Yeah.
Like, where can I sign? Let me put it this. Where can I sign to ask cops, media, everyone, like, please don't release pictures of me when I get brutally murdered. Like, just don't do it, please.
Well, there's this thing called prepaid legal, Berto. Have you heard of it?
I haven't, but tell me more. You sound very charismatic. I should follow you.
Another factor is sexism, pure and simple. Our society loves to attack women. And I don't know how to word it. Is it men trying to balance the scales? Because there's a lot of men out there, the red pill people, the MGTOW incel people, that'll be like, well, women abuse men too sometimes. And it's just like, yeah, totally, absolutely. But, it doesn't deny the fact that society is sexist. So when there's an example like this, it just gives the incels this massive amount of fuel to push back on what they believe to be unfair identification of sexism in society.
Absolutely. I call this the duck scale. Like, this has been going on for thousands of years, right? It's like, there's a witch. We can burn her.
Yeah. I recently watched that movie. Another thing is, racism. That it sounds counterintuitive, but the fact that white stories are told in the media and not other people's stories is another possibility. Another factor is potentially ageism, because most people at the time of this murder, they were older than Jodi Arias was.
Yeah.
And our society loves to look at, especially I think, young women and find reasons to hate them.
Sure.
And so I think this could be another factor. And the final hypothesis I have is that, you and I don't live in this world, but there's a religious world, and there are people that live in this religious world, and this is a philosophy or lifestyle that dominates their life, which is fine. And there are some people within the religious world that are in a constant battle trying to convince themselves to deny their carnal nature.
Right.
They are single and 20 years old, and they're being told that they can't have premarital sex. Or you have elders in the religious community that are trying to tell the younger people not to have sex. And
talk about a cautionary tale.
Yes. That, see, this is what we've been talking about.
I wonder if the Jodi trial is mandatory viewing in some diocese.
I mean, I would not be surprised that it's brought up, because it holds all of the markers, because she, you could argue, manipulated herself into the Mormon church just to be with him.
Yeah.
She was obsessed with it. He was, the way that the media portrays Travis is he was this, this pillar of society, and he was loved by all, and he was a pure man, and this Madonna whore thing, this dirty, secular, non-religious outsider. She's from California, and she comes in and just completely overtakes him with her sexual...
Their Hunnish practices.
Yeah, with her attractiveness, and she seduces him, and then she kills him. And yeah, I mean, certainly she's an awful person, but if you frame it in a certain way of a cautionary tale, or if you've been really trying to convince the young kids not to have premarital sex or to not date people that aren't Mormon or not of your religion, you could see how this story would be a very convenient selling point, if you will.
This is the don't drink and drive equivalent.
Yeah, right. So those are the theories. Let us know in the comment section if you have other ideas or comments about why these stories are so fascinating. Now, I will say that I'm fascinated with the story. So I'm not saying that there's something wrong with being fascinated with a story. I would like to think that I'm not fascinated with it for some of the problematic reasons that we've mentioned, but I do think that it is fascinating because of the brutality, and I guess because of the novelty, but also because of how much psychology is in this, and also just how many things that you can learn from this case as just someone in life. I think there's a lot to be learned about stalking, about how to respond to stalking, about how to help people when they're suffering, about you just never know, I guess, is kind of a thing.
Well, to me, one of the fascination, because I had a similar feeling watching all the Jodi interviews and when she was talking and stuff that I had with the Casey stuff, and it's also the same feeling I've had watching some of the psychopaths we've talked about in the past. I'm not saying these are all psychopaths, but I'm saying that that feeling I get is this uneasiness of I like almost disbelief of how easy it comes to lie and how I feel sort of helpless that I imagine myself confronting or interacting with a person like this and thinking, wow, reality and facts are not a thing that matters in this case. And you can tell me whatever you want without caring that what that means to me or how it might hurt me. Or it's like, it's a little scary. It's frightening. So there is that fascination for me. Maybe it's a morbid fascination, but it is a fascination of, wow, these are real human brains and this is how they work.
Yeah, I'll edit. Fascination with psychopaths. I think another, as a subset of that, another possibility that popped into my head is that in a weird way, the similar way as to why we might like horror movies or mob movies, is that we get to play out our potential fantasies of getting revenge against someone that broke up with us, getting revenge against someone who broke up with us. You got to find out how slowly I type right now. And that sounds abhorrent and not very likely, but I think that there's a possibility that subconsciously while we're watching this, in a similar way that when we're watching like I said, a horror movie or a mafia movie, that we get a subconscious satisfaction watching someone else do what we wouldn't actually want to do, but we have feelings that are of anger and revenge that we wouldn't want to murder our past partners, but we would want to get back at them. We would want to humiliate them.
So it's interesting because I have this sort of 180-degree different reaction when I'm watching a horror movie. I hate to admit it, but oftentimes I am under the surface, not explicitly, but I'm sort of rooting for the bad guy in the horror movie, in the sense that that's kind of what the plot of the movie is. You're seeing this psycho killer kill more, and so there's that part of my brain that's like, okay, how is he gonna keep killing more, right? Now, obviously the conscious and moral part of me goes like, well, no, obviously we want this to stop. That's when I'm watching a horror movie. What's interesting is when I'm watching these cases, a lot of my subconscious fantasy, it steers towards the other aspect, which is how I want to get revenge on this criminal. Like, right. And like, oh, how would I like, and yeah. I would torture them for years. And then I have to fight against myself too, going like, no, stop. You know that's like throwing your life away to think that way.
Because you grew up with the drug cartels in Bogota.
I was the enforcer. They called me the El Enforcito.
Who were terrorizing your community, yeah. And you literally had bullets going.
Right. So you're right. So I had a lot of time to fantasize about how unjust that was and how much I wish justice would come to these people.
That Superman would come down and throw them into the ocean or something. And yeah, so that's another thing. And I think that's another reason why we like mob movies, mafia movies, and horror movies. And I think stories like this is because we both get the satisfaction from both sides. We both get the satisfaction of getting revenge on our former partners, and we get the satisfaction of watching the bully get a consequence. Right. The story for Jodi Arias doesn't end well.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, because like, for example, the Casey story, I don't think there was any part of me that was like, ooh, this is how I would get back at my kid or something, right? That's a horrendous thought. But there was definitely that thought of like, how could I get back at this monster? Right. And in a mob movie, I'm like, oh, how can Tony Soprano get away with it? At the same time, me kind of rooting for him to get caught, but not really. But
totally.
Yeah.
So, Berto, in this chapter, we're going to be going into the relationship and all the details between Travis and Jodi. Mm-hmm. The love bombing, the back and forth, the religious aspects, the sexual aspects, the stalking, and in this chapter we'll probably end up getting to the details of the murder, which I spent a lot of time going over the data and also reading a lot of people's hypotheses about what really happened, because none of us really know what happened during the murder, but there's a lot of evidence to pour over, and I found someone that had hypothesized about the different events, and also there's the prosecution's narrative, and it explains a lot, because there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of also the cleanup, and there's also some theories that I came across that actually felt a lot more satisfying, like the fact that she put the camera in the washing machine, and she's also a professional photographer, so she probably knew about how those things work, and also she could have just brought the camera with her, right? She brought the the knife and the gun with her? Why wouldn't she bring the camera? And so, because at first
I have a theory on that one.
Yeah, and I do too. And it's interesting that at first, because I think most people just think that she's a dumb girl who didn't understand that just putting it in the washing machine wouldn't necessarily do anything. But it's interesting that we would think that instead of trying to figure out some other answer. And especially when you consider she's a professional photographer, or she really studied photography and grew up with digital photography, probably knew a lot about it, a lot more than maybe even you and I know about it. So probably did know a lot more than you and I. So anyway, we're going to go over all that, but this episode is just going to be for patrons of the podcast, because usually when I spend many days prepping for an episode and spending a lot of time on it, I like to really reward the patrons with that, because the only reason why I can even spend that amount of time is because they literally pay my bills, so I don't have to work at the university, so I can spend 16 hours a day for a number of days just studying the Jodi Arias data, of which there is so much to go over. And I almost wanted to postpone this episode to next week, because I wanted maybe another week to go over them, but I figured just pull the ripcord and let it rip. So Berto, in one sentence, why should people become a patron of the podcast and listen to this episode?
Well, besides to support my Coke habit, because I don't like Pepsi anymore, I think there is a wealth of great content. If you care about psychology, if you care about some serious deep dives, like collegiate, like the kind of thing you would read in a book that you bought for $600 from the library at Stanford, like really important stuff, plus a lot of BS coming from my mouth. But it's really interesting topics all over the place. Like, we've covered almost everything. That's important. But if you like it and you want to see it keep going, support it.
Yeah, literally. It's the only way we can keep going. And become a patron. But otherwise, the episode will end now, and take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.